Kia ora koutou, and welcome to our webinar on annual regulatory return for financial institutions. My name is Safia. I'm joined today by my colleagues Anna, Mecca, and Dale. In today's session, we will walk you through how financial institutions can prepare and submit their regulatory return. We'll walk you through how you can access the regulatory return, take a practical look at the structure and the key questions that are asked in each of the sections, and cover steps involved in completing and submitting it. Our goal is by the end of the session, you will feel confident in completing and submitting your return. Now, for context, we published the regulatory return question set in March last year, and we followed up with a series of webinars in May to provide further guidance on completing them. We expect today's session to take about 30 minutes, and we'll leave time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. Now, before we get into the detail, I'll hand over to Mecca to cover some housekeeping.
Thank you, Saf. To ensure that this presentation runs smoothly, could all attendees just make sure that their videos are turned off and that their mics are on mute? This will just help with disruptions. If you have a question, please pop it into the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that and will facilitate the questions throughout this session. We're also recording today's session. We'll be uploading this to the FMA webpage later so that you can review it at your own leisure. If we can't answer your question today, then please feel free to reach out to your normal FMA contact or email us on questions@fma.govt.nz and we can respond later. And just a final note, we're not able to provide any legal advice or comment on any specific business arrangements, so please keep that in mind when you ask your questions. I'm going to now hand over to Anna, who will begin the session.
Thanks, Mecca. The return period is now open, and financial institutions are required to submit their annual regulatory return by 30 September 2026. The information you provide through the return is an important input into our ongoing supervision of financial institutions and supports our risk-based approach to monitoring compliance with licence obligations. The quality and completeness of the information we receive helps us better understand the licensed population, identify emerging risks and trends across the sector, and determine where we should focus our monitoring and supervisory activities. In other words, the return is more than a reporting exercise. It is an important regulatory tool that helps us understand how firms are operating in practice, identify areas of potential risk, and allocate our supervisory resources in the areas where they can have the greatest impact. That's why it is important that the return provided is accurate, complete, and reflects your organisation at the end of the return period. With that in mind, let's move into the practical part of today's session and walk through how to access and complete the regulatory return. Pass over to Safia.
Thanks, Anna. Now that we've covered why the return is important and how the information is used, we'll move on to the practical part of today's session and walk through the submission process. Dale is now going to begin sharing his screen and we'll go through what this looks like in practice. So we'll start with how to access the regulatory return. So you can, on this page, financial institutions can submit their regulatory returns through the FMA's online services portal. Now on here, you would click on online services. And then on the next page, you can click on visit myFMA's secure online services portal to access the myFMA portal. When you're on this page, on the Do It Online page, you will click on Regulatory Returns and complete a regulatory return to begin the annual filing. Now, this is where you'll begin to start submitting your returns. You'll need to input your financial institution's FSPR number. Dale will key in a mock FSPR number to start. And once you've keyed this in, this should show you the entity details below. So as you can see, your entity details displayed there are your name, so Compliant Bank Limited, and the New Zealand business number as well. Now you want to make sure that these details are correct, and confirm that you can file the return on their behalf. So you'd click yes. From the list of returns that are available to Compliant Bank, you will select the FI Annual Regulatory Return. Now, as you scroll further down, it will show you the return period. And as you can see, it says that the return period that you're filing for is from 1 July 2025 to 30th June 2026. So you just want to give it a second to double check that this detail is correct. And then once you're happy with everything, you will click on yes and click here to begin your annual regulatory return. Now on the next page, this is the before you begin section of the form, and it has some helpful instructions. So if you scroll down, you can see that it's got information such as the return period, a quick link to contact the FMA if you're unsure on how to answer any of the questions in the return. We've also included a link to the financial institution's regulatory returns page for some helpful FAQs, as you can see there. And we've also included the link to the question set, so you can refer to the question set if you wish to when you're completing the return. Now, the form is dynamic, so it'll only show you questions that are relevant to your business. So, for example, if you do not indicate that you provide insurance products, you will not see questions relating to insurance products. All of the information should be provided for the return period 1 July 2025 to 30th June 2026. I'm just going to click on Start to begin the return. So the return has been structured into a number of sections covering different aspects of your organization's fair conduct program, outsourcing arrangements, business continuity, and so on. It's presented in a logical sequence, and it can be completed at your own pace. There are about 10 sections in total, including the declaration section. And you can save your progress as a draft at any stage, and you can return back later to complete and finalize your submission. Now, the first section of the form are questions relating to your business structure. There are hover texts above each question to provide guidance on the purpose of the relevant questions. So, for example, for the question, which of the following relevant services has Compliant Bank Limited provided to consumers during the return period? The hover text provides you additional information around the terms relevant service and consumer. You'll see that the questions asked in the return are the same as what was published in the finalized question set. The only difference you would see are formatting edits. For example, the use of radio buttons where the question cannot be displayed in a table format. Okay, so I'm just going to tick a few questions, a few answers on here, and then go to the next section of the return. So the next section of the return are questions that relate to your fair conduct program. What we want to understand in this section is whether your business's FCP has been maintained during the return period and whether any material changes have been made to your FCP. Financial institutions have a duty to establish, implement, and maintain an effective FCP. When I answer yes, it asks me the relevant methods that were used to maintain the FCP during the return period. I'll say, if during regular review of the effectiveness of the FCP, which is option 1, I identify systemic deficiencies, which is option 2, and that's led to the prompt remedy of those deficiencies identified, option 3, then I would select all 1, 2, and 3 for that return period. Now, the next section that we've got on here is around associated products. Depending on the type of product that you provide, the relevant product types are going to appear in the section below. So, for example, for this question, if I select that I provide debt securities, then if I scroll down a little bit, it will show me the relevant debt securities products, such as term deposits, savings, transactional accounts. You should only include associated products provided to consumers in New Zealand during the return period 1 July 2025 to 30th June 2026. This will include products that are no longer being offered to new consumers but are still being held by existing consumers. So, for example, if you have products that you've removed from sale but they're still held by consumers, then these should be included in your answers. When you count consumers, a consumer should be counted once for each different associated product that they hold. And what we mean by this is, let's say you have a consumer that has a transactional account, a KiwiSaver account, and a personal loan. Then they would be counted once under each product type. So a total of 3 times. But let's say you have a consumer that has 2 or more of the same associated product, then you would count the consumer once for that associated product. For example, if you have a consumer that has 2 different savings accounts, then that consumer would be counted once under the savings account. We've also included additional guidance in the hover text, including definitions of key terms such as associated product, consumer, and we've also included links on further information that's available on our website. Now, as you walk through the return, you will see different question types, including multiple choice. Some have drop-down sections, and if you miss answering any of the section, you will receive an error message. Error message text that pops up on the top of the page. So as you can see there, it is prompting me to say that I've missed answering a section, and I would just have to go back and complete answering that. Awesome. Now, as we scroll down, we've got a section on here that also talks about distribution methods. So this looks at distribution methods your financial institution uses to provide relevant services and associated products to consumers. Now, the purpose of the questions is to help us understand the distribution channels you use and the extent to which those channels are reviewed. It is important to note that while the second question is asked annually as part of your regulatory return, this doesn't mean that your distribution methods must be reviewed every year. Now, the frequency of the reviews are going to obviously vary based on your assessment of risk. The help text that we've included in the form provides you with further guidance on the response options and what should be included when we talk about the section. I'm actually just going to take a pause there to see if we have any questions that have come through. Megan, are there any questions that have come through?
Thanks, Xavier. Yes, we just have one at the moment, which is asking whether we have a slide presentation. And I've just noted that we'll be sharing a recording of this with attendees and on our website later on so that people can refer to this later. Otherwise, I don't see anything else, but I encourage anyone who does have a question to please pop it in the Q&A if you have any. Thanks, Saf.
Awesome. Thank you, Mecca. Now we'll move on to the next section of the return, which looks at complaints. So we've included the complaint section because complaints can actually help provide valuable insight into customer outcomes and the potential conduct issues. This also aligns with the FMA's 2026-2027 regulatory priorities, which focuses on the use of complaints data to drive improvements in products, services, and consumer interactions. The intent of the question in this section is to help us understand the complaint activity across the sector. And by definition, when we refer to a complaint, we define a complaint as an expression of dissatisfaction relating to your financial institution service or your complaints handling process, where a response or resolution is either explicitly or implicitly expected. Now, for this section, you'll see that we're seeking information on your complaint volumes, your complaints resolved internally, and complaints that have been escalated to your dispute resolution scheme. Now, Dale is going to try and key in some sections and some answers in this section. If you answer this section incorrectly, or you provide numbers that don't add up, you will receive an error message. So, for example, if the total number of complaints resolved internally during the return period isn't the same as the resolution timeframes, then an error message is going to pop up. So, for example, I will key in, let's say the total number of complaints resolved internally is 3. And for the following time frame section, we load 2 in the 0 to 3 months and 0 for the remaining buckets. This is going to show up as an error message. So as you can see there, the error message displayed basically says that the number of complaints resolved internally during the return period should equal the total number of complaints resolved during each of the timeframes. Just change that. Now, the last 2 questions in this section relate to complaints escalated to your DRS during the return period, and those that were subsequently resolved in the complainant's favor. When answering the question on complaints escalated to your DRS, you should include complaints that the DRS has agreed to review. Okay, I'll take a pause there again, just to see if, Mecca, we have any questions that have come through in the chat.
Thank you, Sapia. Yes, we have had one question, and I'll pass this over to you, Sapia, or for Anna. So this question is, when I had to play with the form, when selecting other, you weren't required to write any commentary. Just checking, we won't need to provide any other information as part of the return.
Thanks, Mecca. That is absolutely correct. So we haven't included other as an option here because we want to specifically only allow to be answers to be included with the selections that we've provided. So you actually, if I can just take a second there, does this question relate to complaints that have come through?
I think it could be general, actually, Saf. So maybe for complaints and for maybe generally if we have any free text fields that you might need to type in commentary.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mecca. Yes, short answer for that is that yes, we haven't included any other text options, and that's because we wanted to specifically include only the selections that have that are available. But I'll pass over to Anna if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think you've covered that. The form is really easy to complete, just selecting from the options that we provide, and there's no need to type anything.
Thank you, Saf. That is all so far.
Okay, thanks, Mecca. All right, now we'll move on to the last 2 sections of the return. The second to last section is looking at outsourcing. So in this section, we look at outsourcing. Standard condition 4 of your license conditions requires entities to be satisfied regarding the capability of their outsourced providers. Now, if you outsource a system or a process necessary to the provision of your financial institution service, then you must be satisfied that the provider is capable of performing the service to the standard required to enable you to meet your market services licensee obligations. Now, we're only interested in outsourced providers that are relevant to your financial institution license. So if if you have activities that are unrelated to the market service of acting as a financial institution, it's not covered under the outsourcing condition. So you don't need to include that. Okay, now we'll move on to the last section. The last section of the return looks at your business continuity arrangements. Standard Condition 5 of License Conditions requires you to have and maintain a business continuity plan or policy that is appropriate to the scale and scope of your financial institution. Your business continuity plan includes the documented procedures that guide you to respond, recover, resume, and restore a predefined level of operation following a disruption. In this section, we want to understand how many of your business continuity arrangements were maintained during the return period, and how many of these arrangements were tested during the return period. I'll just select a few and then I'll go to the next section. Okay, so to help bring everything together, we'll step through a completed example. Now, this section here looks at the last section of the return, which is basically confirming your details. Now, I'm just going to take a second to make sure that I've got my contact details and my information there correct, and then I'll go next before I get onto the declaration part of the return. And in here, what you're basically doing is confirming that you have authority to file the return, and you want to make sure that you've answered all of the sections by the time you get to this stage. So you're confirming that the answers that you've provided are correct and you're satisfied. Now just key in my position in there as well. And you can go submit. Now, once you have submitted the return, you would be able to download the questions that you've answered. And I'll just give it a second because it can take a little bit of time. Okay, perhaps maybe while that's coming up, we'll show you what a completed example looks like. Oh no, there we go. And we'll just go finish. Awesome. Now, if you want to view the return that you've submitted, all you're going to be doing is on this page, you'll click on My Account, and then under the Submitted Forms section, you would be able to view your form under the Closed tab, which is what Dale's bringing up now. Now, if you think that you've submitted anything incorrectly and you need to resubmit, you can simply go back to this page here and click on Duplicate to look at the form that you've submitted and resubmit any sections that you may want to amend. And then we'll just go back to the draft section of the form, now that it's duplicated, and we'll click on View. Now that will take you back to the form to show you so this will take you back to the form, and you can go back and amend your answers where you need to. There we go. Awesome. Now this concludes the practical part of the demonstration for this session. We'll now move on to your questions. Mika, are there any questions in the chat?
Thank you, Seth. Yes, we do. We have currently 3 questions, so I'll just step through them, and please feel free to type in any as we go. Anna, I might pass this question on to you. So this question is, does the FMA have any expectations around the governance oversight or approval of this return prior to submission?
Thanks, Mika. We don't have anything formal in terms of what we've published. You would have seen the question where you need to click to confirm that you have authorization. You're the employee of the entity, that you've got the authorization to submit the return, but we don't prescribe what internal arrangements you need to get that comfort that everything is complete and correct. So that's just up to your internal procedures and risk appetite.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to move on to another question, which is about complaints. Because it's quite long, I'm just going to do my best to paraphrase what I think the key questions are in here. But please do feel free to reach out directly if this doesn't answer it. For an organisation that holds both a VAT licence and a COFI licence, how should complaints be treated when they relate to services that support or are connected to the financial advice product, but they don't directly concern the provision of regulated financial advice?
Thanks, Mecca. So for this return that you're filing, it looks at complaints that are related to your financial institution license. The FAP reg return, or the financial advice providers reg return, looks at complaints that are only related to the provision of providing financial advice. So those two would be separate. The financial advice, the FAP reg return basically looks at just the financial advice reg return provision, whereas the financial institution regulatory return, which is the one that you're submitting now, looks at your overall business, your overall license that you hold for financial institutions. I might just take a pause and see if any of you wanted to add anything to that.
Maybe just to reiterate that they're separate returns. So each of the licensed services that you provide has a separate return, and so there could be some overlap. So if you are providing a financial advice service and you get a complaint about that, and it also might relate to advice about the product that you have provided, then you may be counting that complaint once in your FAP return and once in your financial institution return.
Thank you, Steph and Anna. This is a continuation of the question that we've just answered. If previous regulatory returns have reported a broader set of complaints, would the FMA expect any explanation where a more precise interpretation of the guidance results in a significant reduction in FAT complaint volumes between reporting periods or against the COFI complaint volumes?
Yeah, thanks,
I
Anna.
can take that one. So as I mentioned previously, all of the questions that you need to answer, you're selecting options from tip lists or drop downs. We don't require you in the regulatory return to provide any narrative or explanation of changes between periods. However, potentially when we are reviewing the returns that come in, we may have a question for you if we want to understand more, and we may reach out to you at that time. So we've mentioned that doesn't necessarily mean a concern, it may just mean we're looking to understand the information that you've provided.
Thank you, Anna. So we do have a couple more, so I'll just keep going through these. So the next one is about disaster recovery. The FI license application included details about disaster recovery and business continuity. But we've noted that disaster recovery is not specifically mentioned in this regulatory return. Does this section also cover disaster recovery testing?
Might refer that to you, Anna.
Sure. So if you're right, we don't specifically refer to it. And your business continuity plans may cover different aspects. We know different businesses, different sizes and nature and complexity. And so if disaster recovery is part of your business continuity arrangements, then you would include it. But it's not a specific question that we're asking you in the return.
Thank you, Anna. And moving on. If the financial institution operates in another jurisdiction as well, does this regulatory return cover only New Zealand outsourcing arrangements?
I can probably take that one too.
Thank you.
So this relates to the outsourcing in relation to the services that you are providing in New Zealand. And so if relating to the services that you provide within New Zealand. You outsource, whether that's to New Zealand outsource providers or offshore outsource providers, you would need to count that. However, if your financial institution is operating, let's say in Australia as well, you're not required to count the services and products provided in Australia to Australian consumers, or any outsourcing by the Australian business of the functions that are related to the Australian business only. Hopefully that's clear, but if you've got any further questions, follow-ups to anything that we've provided, as Mika mentioned, you can contact us directly if you've got more detailed questions that you need help with.
Thank you, Anna. And so far, this looks like it's the last one at this stage. Is it possible to save a draft before you submit?
Thanks, Mika. I can take that. Yes, you can. Now, at any stage, you can save it as a draft and then come back and complete it. We don't expect you to complete it all in one sitting. If you do need to come back to it at any stage, you can go back to, as what Dale showed before, under your My account, you can view all of the forms that you've have in draft, or even if you've submitted one as well, you can go back and re-edit that.
Thank you, Seth.
Mika, I think that there aren't any other questions that have come through.
Actually, just as part of what happens, just as
Alright.
no other questions, we just received one, so good timing. If actuarial services is outsourced, would you consider this under the product design function?
Mm.
Anna or Seth, I'm happy to pass over to you two, but that might be more appropriate for perhaps a specific question later on, as that seems perhaps a little bit business specific.
Yes,
but yeah, any comments you
sounds like it. From the reg return, we haven't asked any question around product design. So this might be a question that's specific maybe to your business. But what we can do is perhaps we could take that question away and come back and answer that. Unless, Anna, you wanted to add anything?
Just mulling over. I mean, actuarial function is quite integral, say, to insurers. You could put it under, if you are outsourcing that function, you could capture it under other.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, we will have a copy of all of the questions. So if there's anything that we need to come back to you on, we can definitely reach out to you.
Nothing more so far.
Okay. Now, if there are no other questions, or if you think of any further questions as you're completing the return, or even if you need assistance, you can reach out to your regulator point of contact, or your designate, as you may call them, or alternatively, you can email us on questions@fma.govt.nz. And I think Mecca is just going to key this in the chat. You may also find some helpful FAQs and further information on our webpage under the Financial Institutions Regulatory Returns section, which I think Mecca has also keyed that into the chat now. Now, we hope that you found the session useful. I'm going to now bring in Anna to share some key takeaways.
Thanks, Sophia. Remember that the return can be completed over multiple sessions. It's been designed so that you can complete it at your own pace. And as we mentioned, you can save your progress as a draft at any stage and return later to continue working on the form or to finalise your submission. Many entities can find this helpful where they need to gather information from different areas of the business before you complete the return. The information collected through the return supports our risk-based approach to monitoring financial institutions and their compliance with licence obligations. It helps us better understand emerging risks and trends across the sector, and it informs our ongoing supervisory activities. We've also had some questions previously about whether firms might hear from the FMA after submitting their return. In some cases, we may follow up if clarification is required, or if we would like to better understand the information that you have provided. As I mentioned earlier, a follow-up request doesn't necessarily indicate a concern. might simply just help us ensure that we've correctly understood the information that you have submitted. Lastly, just suggest that you don't leave tackling the return right until the end of the reporting period. Starting early gives you time to gather the information, seek input from the different areas of your business, and it allows for time in the end in case you do want to amend any of the answers. So just check if there are any last questions.
There's nothing coming through at the moment, Anna.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I think all that remains is to thank everyone for joining us. Hope you found it helpful. And as we mentioned, we have recorded it and we will be sharing that with you and posting that on our website so that if you do want to watch the video again and see Safia and Dale stepping through all of those screens showing how to enter the data, you can go back and review that. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.